I'll just let you know before we get too far into this is that I ended up getting quite emotional during my session earlier today because I felt like over the last, yesterday especially, that some of the comments by representatives from some of the activist organizations were verging on really attacks to some degree on IACUCs and on the IACUC membership, and the efforts that the people who attend this meeting, that they on a daily basis are the true defenders of the animals. And I just had to say that to them, We appreciate you. We thank you for what you do in spite of everything that goes on. You have to deal with recalcitrant PIs. You have to deal with people who just don't care, who don't get it for whatever reason. And you're there on, as I said, always trying to move your programs forward. So that was, as I said, I may not get through this without having a little bit of emotion come through, and I don't know if that's bad or good or whatever. So.
Well, I also think that that's why you're an uncommon, number one, an uncommon regulator, and number two, an uncommon human being, because you feel things deeply and you are full of gratitude for the people who are out there trying, and you express that. So many people are, for whatever reasons, unwilling or unable even to let people know that you're doing a good job. There's work still to be done, but thank you for every day getting out there and trying to care for and reduce problems in your research programs. So care for animals and reduce problems. So.
Right.
So I have a question. Was that on the record or off the record, what you said about, your feeling like some of the things that were said here verged on attacks, and you felt that you wanted to thank the people in your session? I thought that was a very poignant and powerful statement, and I didn't know if that was sort of a preface or whether you're willing to have that be on the record.
No, I think that's true. That's and NIH, of course, the support that our office has would never question that kind of a statement, because we always say, and we have complete support from the administration, that it is a partnership. NIH and the grants policy and everything considers it a partnership between the institution and its employees and NIH as a provider of the funds for the research environment.
So with that already very, for me, profound acknowledgement of who you are, let's start winding the clock back a little. And I'm always interested when I meet people who are leaders, who are tremendous, not just successes in their own lives, but those whose success has affected a much wider arena and universe. I'm interested in what your early influences were. What was it, if you can identify one or more either people or events that brought you to the threshold of this career, of this field, of who you are today in the professional world?
Before I started in laboratory animal medicine, I was an active duty Air Force veterinarian. And I got to that position because when I was in veterinary school, like many veterinary students, I didn't have the funds to be able to pay for tuition and all the things that go along with being in school. And I found out about a Air Force scholarship program and applied and was accepted while I was in veterinary school. So I had an obligation when I graduated to repay that scholarship. And during my first tour, I found out also about opportunities for residency, and I had always seen myself as, moving into a more academic environment or something more challenging than going back into just day-to-day clinical practice, in a small animal practice or something like that. I really did have a real avocation or interest in the academic environment. So I applied and went into a residency program that was sponsored by the Air Force again, but was at the Hershey Medical Center in Hershey, PA. And that was for me, really, it just everything clicked, because I was in an environment, and this was in the early 1980s, before the requirement for IACUCs. But I was in an environment where the veterinarians and the faculty that were part of the Department of Comparative Medicine were truly team members, involved with the research going on, involved with the investigators, and in a collaborative, cooperative process. And we were there as these young veterinarians, really feeling like we could help them advance the science that they were doing. And Hershey was one of the places at the time that was working on the artificial heart models in cattle. So there was opportunities there to see some really just breakthrough research that was going on and be part of that. So I think that was kind of, for me, a real turning point.
Your journey led you from vet school to Hershey, and from Hershey, what was your next step? Because you stayed at Hershey from 80 to 82, and it was there that you first understood about lab animal veterinary medicine, about helping investigators. How did you figure out what your next move would be?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was still indentured to the Air Force, and because they had supported me through this master's and residency program, I owed them additional time to complete my obligation to them. So I was assigned to the National Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right across the street from the National Institutes of Health. So while I was there, I again had great opportunities to work with researchers on all kinds of research focused on helping the sailor, how to best protect the sailor from occupational risks and injuries, and a good deal of research in infectious diseases. But then I was invited. I completed my obligation, but then I had the opportunity to get invited to come over and start a career at NIH, and I think that was truly a true gift for me, in terms of just like many other people, NIH is looked upon very highly, and the activities going on there, the veterinarians that I already knew there were very, very positive about the role that I could play if I went there. Now, this again was right during the transition to adoption of the Public Health Service policy, the new regulatory requirements under the Animal Welfare Act for having IACUCs, and NIH, the intramural research program, which I joined in 1986, was also in the throes of how to address this across a very large collection of animal programs involving all the different institutes and centers at NIH. And I was fortunate enough again to be offered an opportunity at the National Cancer Institute, and I spent 10 years at NCI, starting as a clinical veterinarian, and then over time I became the animal program director. And again, I felt coming from the senior administration at NCI, the true commitment to what the veterinarian says goes. And I think that also was an empowering environment, even at a time when there was still this kind of transition of what do we have to do to meet the requirements for an IACUC review. And NCI had equivalents of an IACUC in place for many years before that. So it wasn't a lot of change that had to go on there, but the centralization of the animal program was also undertaken there while I was there because of the requirements that NIH intramural program was seeking accreditation by ALAC for their entire program at the time too. But again, it was this collegial environment. One of my most, I guess, poignant and very important for me opportunities I had was working with the radiation oncology branch at NCI, because they were working on, at the time, a new therapy for a number of kinds of cancer that's called photodynamic therapy. And then using laser light, they can, and the injection of a light-sensitive compound, they can focus on killing cancer cells and leave the normal healthy tissue around those cancer cells unaffected. So this was at the early stages of going into clinical trials, and as I said, they needed veterinarians involved with the research in the species that they were working on, because the anesthesia needed to be appropriate. And so, as I said, it was again a really feeling like you're really making a contribution, because you're needed to provide your veterinary skill set to something that's going to truly be advancing human health too.
So it sounds like you and NIH were, a perfect fit. And again, at NCI for 10 years, what was your next move within NIH?
Well, then I went to the Office of Animal Care and Use, which is the oversight office for the entire intramural research program at NIH. So we were the office that assisted the institutional official, and NIH intramural program has a single institutional official for the entire program that's Bethesda based. And so we as I started as the training coordinator at Office of Animal Care and Use, and then was also the deputy director there for a period of time, and we provided guidance to the 15 plus animal care and use committees. We attended the meetings and were kind of the eyes and ears for the institutional official about what was going on across the entire program. And I think that's where I kind of cut my teeth on having an understanding of the PHS policy and the Animal Welfare Act regulations and the requirements of IACUCs.
I'd like to pause for a moment, and it was an oversight at the outset of this interview for me not to ask you what your present title is, please. So if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
just stating for the record just what it is you now do.
So I'm the director of the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, and OLA, as we're known, we're part of the Office of Extramural Research at the National Institutes of Health, but our authority and responsibility comes from the Public Health Service Policy on Humane Care and Use of Laboratory Animals. And that extends to all Public Health Service funded activities that involve research training, or biological testing.
In that capacity, you are, in effect, one of the highest-ranking government officials in the animal research sphere, and you are not only a regulatory agency, but your office has become known and appreciated for its educational efforts. So thank you for that. And I think one thing that would be very helpful to those who watch this interview in the future would be, given your very long-standing and central role in the NIH and in laboratory animal research and laboratory animal care. Would you mind summarizing the history of the regulations to the extent that you're willing? You can limit it to the NIH, or if you'd like, you can talk about the USDA regs as well, or at least cite them, because I think you have a better big picture than most people, and it would be very helpful both for the archival record and for those who watch this interview to sort of have a general sense of the regulatory framework for those who use animals in research.
Okay. If I start with the historical precedents, the first Animal Welfare Act was 1966, which was tied to the concern that the public had for the acquisition of dogs for research purposes under less than scrupulous conditions, and the need to have regulations to try and protect pets from becoming part of the research enterprise through, as I said, less than acceptable resource sources. But in and around that same time, NIH had standard positions about research that it was funding needed to be at a minimum have consideration for minimizing pain and distress to animals, and there was expectation that as needed that there would be review during at the institution. There was no specific requirement for a committee until the 1971 version of what would be called the PHS policy. It did have recommendations that the institution have a committee at a minimum of 3 members, and but that then evolved over time, and the pivotal point came in 1985, and that was with the creation of the Public Health Service policy on humane care and use of laboratory animals that extended the oversight to as all of the Public Health Service funded activities, and the requirement for this Animal Care and Use Committee was then mandated in that particular version of the policy, and had clear requirements for the membership of the committee, the responsibilities of the committee, the requirement for semi-annual program review of the Animal Care and Use Program, and facility inspections by the committee. It also established a requirement for self-reporting by the institution of non-compliance with the policy. And it also invoked a requirement that the institution, as part of its agreement to accept funds to conduct research with animals, that there be an agreement in place with the Office for Protection from Research Risks, also known as OPRR. So the PHS policy has within it this requirement for IACUC oversight, this requirement for an assurance agreement with the Office for Protection from Research Risk, which later became the Office for Laboratory Animal Welfare, and also requirement for self-reporting of non-compliance. I think I mentioned that earlier. And within the framework of the policy is this concept that self-monitoring and self-reporting at the local level is far superior to depending on an inspection-based process where they have to catch you in the act of doing something wrong. It invokes the idea that the program itself can benefit by self-reporting and making improvements, and with the guidance of our office, we engage actively in that partnership. So, and the educational aspect of that is also written in the policy, that OLASH is to advise grantees of their responsibilities under the policy. So that's how we get to the point that we do have an educational and outreach responsibility that's given to us through the policy.
And if you would just briefly cite the year of the USDA regulations. I know there have been many versions.
Right. So the creation of IACUCs, that requirement was also 1985, and there were further amendments after that that brought into play a number of other issues, but I think the pivotal change was where both the USDA requirements and the PHS requirements are almost identical. There's a few differences, but this focus on the IACUC and its oversight of animal activities, as I said, 1985 is the point in time. And the other key document that sometimes I think gets lost in the discussion is the U.S. government principles for the use of animals in research. And the U.S. government principles came out of a committee called the Interagency Research Animal Committee, which had been started out as the Interagency Primate Steering Committee originally as a way for the federal agencies at the time that were involved with research with non-human primates to coordinate the availability of primates for biomedical research. But they evolved into this Interagency Research Animal Committee as a way to continue to have a dialogue about other activities involving animals that weren't just involving primates. And Dr. Joe Held and Dr. Bob Whitney were two of the key individuals who spearheaded the development of the U.S. government principles through their interaction on this IRAC, Interagency Research Animal Committee, and their involvement also with the SIAMS, development by the SIAMS organization of the international guiding principles for the use of animals in research. And those also that also all kind of came to being in 1985. So there was this kind of watershed period of time when everyone was all kind of lining up to create principles, to create guidance, and to empower IACUCs.
So I think, excuse me, I'm going to start over. I think that the majority of those in the primer audiences would love to be a fly on Dr. Pat Brown's wall and see what a day in your office, a day in the life of your office is like. And I'd like you to share what you comfortably can about the balance among educating, following up on reports, issuing letters of noncompliance, reviewing proposals for perhaps new guidance or even new regulations. If you would, please tell us about a day in the life of, however you choose to structure it.
Okay, well, I think it's probably best to start by describing how my office is made up. So I have 3 divisions in my office. I have a division of assurances, I have a division of compliance oversight, and I have a division of policy and education. And each of those divisions has a astute director who manages their portion of the OLA responsibilities quite effectively. So it allows me, I think, to step back from some of the day-to-day things that people might think I might get involved in, and ends up putting me in the place of having to do some of the other things that may not be as thought of as, well, why are you doing that? Well, somebody has to look at the budget for OLA. So some days I am focused on the budget, and other days I'm focused on what might come in as a Freedom of Information Act request, and We work closely with the Freedom of Information Act officer for the Office of Extramural Research. We also work with the NIH Freedom of Information Office too, because sometimes requests rise to the level of having to be reviewed by the NIH FOIA office also because of the potential for litigation. So get involved in all those things. We also are quite frequently asked to provide responses to the media on either some new allegation that's come up that in a local media incident or something that involves allegations about animals where NIH may have funded the activity, or just a question that comes to NIH in general about how are animals taken care of, how is NIH involved in the oversight of research that it funds that involves animals. So I do get involved with that. But again, the Division of Assurances is there to manage the day-to-day review and approval and renewal of assurance agreements, which is that contract between the institution and our office about their agreeing to follow the policy and the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals and the Animal Welfare Act regulations. The Division of Compliance Oversight, they're the ones that review the self-reports from institutions where there's been a non-compliant activity that's been PHS funded or programmatic that needs to be reported for our office to evaluate the corrective actions that the institution has put in place to prevent that non-compliance from happening again. It's a full circle goes on during the investigation of a non-compliance where the institution self-reports, but as part of their self-report they're also providing a corrective action plan, and then as part of our review of that we may ask for more questions. A final report then, if it meets all of our clarifications, would then be considered an acceptable response, and we would send back a letter to that institution acknowledging that from our standpoint the case has been closed. So those come in quite frequently, and we have 3 compliance officers, including the director, who review those cases. And we also receive allegations. We receive allegations from whistleblowers. Sometimes they prefer to remain anonymous, which is fine. We do our best to maintain anonymity. We also receive allegations, of course, from the media. We may receive allegations from animal activist organizations or just concerned citizens who may have found out about something and they want to let us know about it. So we review all of those. Anything that we are convinced is within our jurisdiction, because we have to determine whether it involves PHS funded activity for us to have the authority to investigate. We will then follow up with the institution and ask them to thoroughly investigate and report back to us on what was determined about the allegations. So, and then policy and education, they're doing our outreach. They're involved with our collaborative support that we provide for workshops and conferences, including the Primer IACUC conference that I think we've been involved with in one way or the other for many years, and also some of the other organizations like Scientist Center for Animal Welfare, the IACUC 101 program. We've supported them for many years. And then in the last few years, we started doing our own OLA webinars, and we find that also to be a very effective way to get guidance out to the community, and also have the dialogue that we think is so important to understand where we need to provide further clarification or just engage with them as to issues and problems that they have with their programs. So it's been very
Phew.
helpful.
Busy and certainly complicated and certainly high stakes enterprise. And again, the extent to which you and your colleagues at OLA have built such strong bridges to the community, and the extent to which, as you've just told us, you really are there to work with them is, I think, an uncommon but entirely inspiring example of the best public-private partnerships. It's really, I think, unusual among governmental agencies and the communities they serve.
Well, I think part of that does come from the wording in the PHS policy, and just in general the sense that NIH and how it's the framework that we have is structured. We are not a regulatory body, but we are there as stewards of public funds, and that's clearly where we are involved in this process. Is that the arrangement between the institution and NIH is based on terms and conditions in them institution accepting the funds, and we're wanting to make sure that those funds are spent appropriately within the framework of humane animal care and use.
If my calculations are correct, it's been almost 7 years that you've been the director of OLA, and I'd like you to think about and then share with me, please, what both volume of complaints or allegations of noncompliance, how that volume has changed, and more importantly, how the content of those allegations of noncompliance have changed over your 7 years.
Well, starting back in around the year 2000, I believe, the Division of Compliance Oversight started to try and track the total number of cases that were opened each year. And we've maintained that record. And in the last few years, we've clearly been closing in on 1,000 cases a year. Okay, but many of those are self-reports, and many of those may be from someone on the outside looking in. They would say, well, that doesn't, some of them don't seem that serious. But it's still, as I said, we work with the institution, self-report if it's based on non-compliance because of a protocol deviation. Even if there was no harm to the animals, it's still something that they are compelled to let us know about. And as I said, we have those in there. We have, as I said, allegations that we receive. I would say there hasn't been a true increase in the number of allegations. I think they kind of just perk along. But the vast majority of our cases every year are self-reports. And as I said, this speaks to what we look at as the way the system's supposed to work. And we know that some institutions, when they've enhanced their post-approval monitoring program, they often see a bump up in the number of cases. And we accept that because that means they are identifying problems and issues and they're taking the appropriate corrective actions. And it's only when we see a disconnect between what they're reporting and that it seems to be the same problem over and over again, that then we go back to them and say, okay, we've seen the same kind of report repeatedly over the last so many months or year or whatever. What are you doing from a programmatic standpoint to correct this? And we have done that for certain circumstances, certain institutions where there was enough of a indication that they needed to look at something more on a programmatic level than just individual incidents involving investigators. And consistently, since we have been tracking the cases, it's protocol violations that are at the top of the list, where they're either doing something that hasn't been approved, or they're deviating from what they agreed to do in the protocol, or they're starting something that hasn't yet been approved. And so those still tend to be at the top of the list. And in many cases, we look back at the institution as it's an education issue, it's a training issue, and getting everybody on board with what the requirements are, that you shouldn't be doing any research with animals without having IACUC approval.
As you know, perhaps better than, or at least as well as anyone, the issue of research with animals is fraught with controversy and certainly tension. We've heard that throughout this conference, at every other primer conference, at any gathering of researchers, and those working with animals, the regulators, the policymakers, those representing other federal agencies, certainly ethicists, and everybody in between. And you did mention that some of the complaints or allegations you receive are from the animal rights groups. And I wonder, in your now long and again distinguished career in this field, most of which at NIH, with the exception of your years at Hershey, how would you characterize the evolution of the tensions between the animal rights movement and the research establishment?
In the 1980s, and I think in response to the activist organizations, that did push the Congress to address the issue, and the creation of the PHS policy, the creation of the Animal Welfare Act regulations requiring IACUC oversight. So they pushed it, and it was, in their own way, they have to be given credit for that, I believe, the activist organizations. And I think there's many of us in the research community that will acknowledge that or recognize that. I think the tension continues, and I think, as has been seen recently with the requirement that Congress placed on NIH to have the Institute of Medicine study involving chimpanzees, is another example where political pressure was placed to move a circumstance forward to address a concern that had been going on for a while. So OLA was not directly involved with that. That really is at the level of the NIH leadership to make a decision about the science it will or will not choose to fund, and also the ethical framework for how the decision will be made as to what to do in the future is still to be decided. But at the present time, that pressure continues, and as we've heard, even at this conference, there's a continuing list of issues that the animal activist organizations feel like should be brought to the attention of the research community, and they should be held, that they're expecting the research community to respond and be held accountable on some of these issues.
One question I always like to ask those who have reached pinnacles in their field is, who would you cite as your mentors? Who are those individuals from any walk of your life who have inspired or informed or otherwise helped you on your journey?
Well, it's a long list.
Their names will be here for posterity.
Right. Well, I think I'll. If I start in veterinary school, there was certainly a good number of the faculty there that begrudgingly accepted the fact that half of it possibly may have been more than half of our class was female, But some of the faculty themselves were female, and they were truly an inspiration, I think, to have women veterinarians teaching at the University of Pennsylvania and being there to show us as models for how we could be successful. And Adrienne Morrison was also on the faculty and was my anatomy professor when I was at Penn too. And I knew him at the time. The things that he ended up having to face in his career had not yet occurred when I was in veterinary school. You know, his challenges that he had involving his research. But I will say that he was an excellent faculty member and someone that I always looked up to as, you know, one of the good teachers and an inspiring individual too. So I do want to mention his name as someone that later on also continued to be inspiring. In my experiences in the Air Force, there were certainly a number of people who were influential to me and encouraging me. In particular, Bob Gunnels, who was my supervisor for the 4 years, or close to 4 years, that I was at the Naval Medical Research Institute. He was very active in many of the animal science organizations and was a good inspiration in how it's important to get involved in not just in what you're doing day to day, but also in the organizations that help extend us and enhance what everybody needs to know or do or whatever. Then Bill Britz also was an Air Force veterinarian when I was in my early training days, and I did learn a lot from him too. Moving on to NIH, I would say Bob Whitney was who recruited me to come to NIH, and I value that to this day as a wonderful opportunity, and I feel truly blessed to have been able to spend my career since 1986 at NIH. Dr. Max Lang was my mentor when I was at Hershey Medical Center, and Dr. Bill White was my faculty mentor for my master's degree. So between the two of them, I think they did a lot to help me understand the role that veterinarians play as laboratory animal in providing support to laboratory animals, but also in that collaborative effort that goes on, collegial teamwork that goes on when the veterinarians brought into the process for working with the research animals.
We chatted a few moments ago about the controversy that continues to plague this field, the tension between the research establishment and the animal rights establishment or organizations. And I wonder whether you think there's still work to be done about informing the public about the use of animals in research and the nature of the protections that are in place through OLAW, through USDA. And if you think that the public could be better informed, how could that goal be best achieved?
There is always more that can be done, and I think that if I've learned anything, it's that the more we can communicate, the more we can reach out and help the public understand the commitment that OLAW has, the partnership that we have, the expectation that we have for institutions to follow the rules and to self-report and to make their programs better. but also the partnership that extends to the NIH mission, which is advancing the public's health, and how every day there is research going on with animals that not only benefits the patients and their families, but also may end up benefiting their pets or just the greater community in general, the wild animals, or just the advancement of science and the advancement of our knowledge and understanding of the world we live in. So.
And I know that OLAW is doing more than its part to ensure that public education is ongoing and widespread. Our last question is that blue sky question. If you could influence or affect a major change in the way animal research is conducted, or with the way IACUCs review protocols, or in anything having to do with the animal research establishment and enterprise as they exist today, and if money and resources were no object, what would you wish for? If you could finish the sentence, if only, how would you finish it?
If only I could sit down with each graduate student as they take on their career, and that career involves working with animals, to impress on them the privilege that they have been given to be able to use animals in research, and along with that privilege is the serious responsibility to ensure the care and appropriate use of those animals. I think it would go a long way. I've struggled with how do we invoke this process. There's ways to do it. Possibly we should be doing maybe with Primer or others, bringing these people into the fold more, or encouraging them through outreach efforts. But I think that's would be a starting point, would be to engage the next generation and get them truly part of it. And not that many of them already are sensitized and do have this, but to really keep them tracking this and not losing sight of it throughout their careers too.
What a wonderful goal! What a important wish. And if there is anything concrete that Primer can do at any time, I share it. I share your wish, because I think that's where it all begins. If grad students can understand early, before they really have a chance to, or while they're just starting their careers, I think it is a very important step to talk to someone like you, to have a mentor like you, or to otherwise be educated in a calm and considered and respectful way about what the opportunities are, as you say, what the privileges are, and what the responsibilities that accompany those privileges are. So before we do close, I want to congratulate you, Dr. Brown, because I know you received the Henry Roselle Award last year,
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the most prestigious awards in our field. And the award was inscribed, and I'm going to read the quote because it really does pay tribute to your very great ability to bridge many different interest groups and stakeholders in this diverse field. The inscription is, in recognition of your special commitment in fostering the dual goals of good science and the humane treatment of animals. So I wanted to end by congratulating you on this very deserved honor, and the many other honors you've received. There are at least 20 here over the course of your long and very, very distinguished career. And again, it's a privilege to have spoken with you, but a very great privilege to have worked with you these past 7 years. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and the working relationship. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Oh, very